Okay, well, thank you very much for having us here, and to Matteo and Amira for organizing this wonderful event. Yaqub and I have known each other a long time, and I have to credit him for spotting what we're talking about today before, helping really put this together and I think drive this research. And I've tried to offer help in the ways that I can. I'm a historian of AI, but both of us have found ourselves talking about the present as well. And so we're going to relate some of what we've been working on today. We weren't able to attend yesterday because we were sharing this research with folks that are interested in it at NATO. Make of that what you will. We can talk about it over drinks if you're interested. Okay, so the plan for this session is to do two things. I'm going to introduce some market dynamics around AI and try and talk about incentive structures, and then I'll pass to Yaqub to bring us through the parameters of power, what we mean by that phrase. So let's kick off. I'm going to show you a video here. You may not be able to hear it. I'll draw from it afterwards, even if you can't understand it, but let's see if you can.
And for the last 60 years, that's the way we've been doing computing. Well, now, general purpose computing is going to give way to accelerated computing and AI computing. And let me illustrate to you why. The canonical use case of the future is a large language model in the front end of just about everything. Every single application, every single database, whenever you interact with a computer, it will likely be first, you'll likely be first engaging a large language model. That large language model will figure out what is your intention, what is your desire, what are you trying to do given the context, and present the information to you in the best possible way. It will do the smart query, maybe a smart search, augment that query and search with your question, with your prompt, and generate whatever information necessary. And so the canonical example that I'm using here is a Llama 2 large language model that is being inferenced. It then does a query into a semantic database, a vector database of some kind, and the output of that is augmented and becomes a guide for a generative model.
So even if you can't hear that, Jensen Huang will be telling this story for probably my entire adult life. You will hear it again out in the world. This is from a sales video. He is the CEO of NVIDIA, if that's not known to you already. So let's back up a step and just kind of, I'm going to point to the gasoline on the floor, and then Yaqub will point to how it combusts. Capital expenditure, according to McKinsey, take these numbers through that lens, is said to range between $3 and $8 trillion in AI infrastructure by 2030. It's a huge amount of money. And alongside these investments, one of the things we've been trying to figure out is how they recoup on these, this scale of money down. And we've seen increasingly kind of national securitization and kind of chest beating. This is from OpenAI in September of last year, a report in which the title of the report is "Infrastructure is Destiny." So the interweaving of kind of national narratives and the future of AI is probably well known to you if you follow this in the news. But the kind of dissonance of these narratives is becoming more and more obvious. So OpenAI in May announced OpenAI for Countries, a new initiative to support countries around the world that want to build on democratic AI rails. And they began with the UAE, Stargate UAE, and you see here reporting from this meeting. The Stargate initiative, it was one of the first things Trump publicly did upon taking office. Whether posturing or substantive, these investments and these partnerships are taking place around us very rapidly. And what we have been trying to do, as I said, is figure out the incentive model, or one of the incentive models in the background to recoup on these investments and these partnerships. And I'm going to briefly introduce what we have called the intention economy as a sort of mutation of the attention economy, which is at the beating heart of online commerce, but with some slight adjustments that I'll introduce for you now. In a sentence, the intention economy is a digital marketplace for commodified signals of intent. So what does intention mean? It has a wide range of conceptualizations in academia and Western analytic philosophy, who've related it to purposeful action and individual reasoning, consciousness, and mental representations of the future. And you see, in the West at least, less emphasis on the role of spontaneity or incapacity or irrationality. So the intellectual history of intent, I think, would be fascinating. If you've come across anything in this vein, please let us know. But the reason we're not dwelling on what intention actually is that the industry doesn't really make sense of it that way. They have their own interpretations, kind of euphemisms for what intention is, a kind of colloquial understanding. And we follow Stark and Hui in their work on emotion as an evaluative signal in computational design, that you need not accept the validity of technical and scientific conceptualizations of, in their case, psychological phenomena such as emotion when evaluating the ethics and implications of these systems. You can kind of treat it as an actor's category, although it would be still fascinating to unpack further. So, two assumptions that we see as kind of relevant to these colloquial uses of intention, a few of which I'll introduce in a minute. The first is that they require an enclosure of some type that acts in which intentions emerge. So Maggie Bowden has written about this as far back as 1973, that intentionality, in her view, is a highly structured phenomenon arising within a highly structured system. And you've likely come across terms like choice architecture that kind of plan for and script and encourage choice, or this kind of steering of intent within a structured system. The second assumption is that intention has a temporal quality. This is a bit, we could tighten this up, but for now, it's future directed, it's historically informed, and it is experienced in the present. It's, in some sense, an expression of agency carried through time. And one way we've described the intention economy is as the attention economy, but plotted in time. So it's got additional kind of dimensions to it that can be lucrative. So, the value is that we're plotting, or no, the tech industry is keen to plot users' attention across various timescales, see how it changes, calcifies, and connects to archetypal patterns or pathways for user behavior. Some intentions are fleeting, others persist, making their discretization lucrative to advertisers. An example that a colleague in Cambridge published yesterday, and I encourage you to check this out. It's fascinating research on menstrual tracking apps that, in their estimate, signals that someone is pregnant are worth 200 times signals that they are of a certain age. So these kind of moments in time will become more and more discernible as these tools are used, or as the advertising industry is kind of equipped with large language models, or rebuilt around large language models. And I'll go back to what Jensen was saying in a minute. Just to visualize this, these are two non-peer-reviewed papers, but I think adequate for this task, of visualizing these kind of pathways. So you can see on my right here, the flow diagrams of different political persuasions and how they move between other political persuasions following exposure to YouTube rabbit holes. And the idea is, if you can start to kind of clock this sort of thing, not just in terms of politics, but all possible pathways, then you can apply pressure to send new users down those pathways. And the sense or the focus on intention in industry is not new, in the tech industry at least. Doc Searles, who's a colleague at the Berkman Klein has written in very positive terms about this, thinking that this would be great. We'll have highly efficient, personalized marketplaces that would only help the economy kind of free, or to help marketplaces avoid the kind of false I don't know how to say this. Let's just leave it at highly efficient. And also equally of concern over monopoly power, over markets, and Google search as an instance of a kind of database of intention. And there's this poetic line that Yaqub found from John Patel. describing the Google's database as possibly the most lasting, ponderous, and significant artifact in the history of humankind, the results of every search ever entered, every result list ever tendered, every path taken as a result, together a massive clickstream database of desires, needs, wants, and preferences that can be exploited to different sorts of ends. In the 2020s, you know, that's kind of known to us, right? So what is it that intentionality and what is it more broadly that generative AI makes possible? And this is where I'll close and then pass to Yaqub. So Jensen Huang, what he was saying there, I'll read out the kind of key piece. He said, the canonical use case of the future is a large language model that is the front end of just about everything. Whenever you interact with a computer, you'll likely be first engaging a large language model. That large language model will figure out what is your intention, what is your desire, what are you trying to do, given the context, and present the information to you in the best possible way. It would do this smart query, maybe a smart search, augment that query and search with your question, with your prompt, and generate whatever information is necessary. And we, in a more recent paper, have been connecting this to Ort Halpern's and Robert Mitchell's The Smartness Mandate, which kind of anticipates this sort of system in which you are enclosed in decision infrastructure that often works against you, but this is a kind of broadening of that, or treating it in more discrete terms. And, you know, Apple has designed in service of this end, their app intents ecosystem, a framework of protocols to map intent discovery, relevancy, and predictions across apps to, in their words, predict actions someone might take in the future, and to procure the relevant interfaces needed to suggest the app intent to someone in the future using predictions you, the developer, provide. So there's other touch points that we can go into, but that's just one of them to make the point. This is where I'll end, tokenization as assetization. So assetization is something that Keen Birch has written about, and I encourage you to check out his work if you haven't come across it. But I'll get to assetization. First, I'll introduce tokenization, which I didn't think I maybe would need to introduce to this audience, but I will do nonetheless. In simple terms, tokenization in the use of generative AI describes the basic informational structure used by transformer models, which disaggregate entities in the world into finite pieces called tokens, whose dynamics in relation to one another are interpreted in high-dimensional space. Simple way to think about this is sort of a magical blender that disaggregates a piece of fruit into umpteen pieces, but it can, you know, disaggregate a face, a song, a piece of writing, and then reorder those assemblage of tokens or strings of numbers into new cumulative wholes. And, you know, NVIDIA is pushing the idea that tokens are the language and currency of AI. And this is in part because their perceived value is that they are, you know, plausibly a kind of new standard of cultural exchange. And this room knows that better than maybe anybody in the world. So I'm very excited to be here with you and to learn from you. Final step, assetization. So I mentioned Keen Birch. An asset is an item of property owned by a person or company regarded as having value and available to meet debts, commitments, or legacies. The critical piece to understand here is that unlike the valuation of a commodity, which is generally extinguished upon its consumption, ownership and control of an asset extends one's right to copies and derivatives, which adds additional scope for control and extraction. So Birch says this, that kind of points to this flexibility nicely in saying that no one can tell you how to wear a coat you have bought, but they can tell you how to use the copyrighted music or data they have sold you. And this sort of kind of stewardship, to be generous, is maintained. So Birch writes that an asset requires active and ongoing organization, governance, and management. It is not a passive process. For a thing to be assetized, it must be discursively framed and understood as having the potential to become an asset through the deployment of metaphors and narratives by credible experts to identify it as an object that can be governed in a particular way. So if I go back to these images, in a sense, we're saying that these pathways across all sorts of different permutations will have a financial character, a financial life as well. And we are interested in understanding how you know, AI's ensconcement in the ad industry will kind of shape the outcomes there. And to give you a clear sense of what that looks like, I will pass to Yaqub.
Thank you very much, Jonnie. It's an honor and pleasure to talk to you all today. So I'll be talking about the way power extends throughout this whole information environment. Throughout the very information environment itself, to the point of contact with the individual and into the depths of their minds. So taking the broadest level, this is, so what you'll tend to see is discussion tends to focus on one side of the or the other. Yeah. Okay. Discussion, for example, on whether the proliferation of generated content will lead to an overall collapse of information, or whether it will homogenize everything out there. What I want to emphasize is that we should really be looking at this as just possibilities which can be dialed in. They are states of which can be targeted. So if an actor wants to pursue creating information chaos, then they can, they can start with proliferating the information environment with, irrelevant information which is not helpful to individuals. So here we've got different bad actors polluting the information environment, leading to sort of inability of the individual to, actually access what they need. So in this situation, AI can be positioned as an intellectual authority, as sort of an oracle system to guide the user. So this is one sort of position of power which is instantiated through generative AI tech. So the problem itself is created because of generative AI, but AI itself comes in as the remedy to this. In the broader sort of the technical infrastructure is that in all areas of life, whether it's medicine, legal, government, finance, all areas defer to an AI machine learning system for inference as an authoritative source of inference and information. There's some people who are already exploring this in their personal lives. So this New York Times columnist has gone on decision holiday, just putting every question to AI and letting it answer everything for them. Another person has sort of given up their entire memory to AI. I was thinking of sort of like a scale we could use for this. That if you give up half of your thought to an LLM, you can be like a half-wit. And then it can decrease in the proportion of agents which you've allowed to play a role in your life until there's only an atomic residue of your own thought left, and you can be a nano-wit. Okay, anyway, so the other option is uniformization. Again, this is well discussed in literature, but my point is that these are sort of directions which can be targeted. So in this case, we have the foundation model, and intrinsically, derivative models inherit the homogenizing, the culturally significant factors from the foundation model, and spread that to all derivative models, producing some level of homogenization in the outputs. Okay, so that's the broader perspective. Now I want to come to sort of more of an excavation of the instruments and mechanisms of power, and the scholar I'm sort of using as my link to Foucault and Deleuze is David Savat, and he was writing just before the emergence of social media, but his characterization, as I'll explain, is useful. So he says the writing apparatus through which discipline operates. So it was the databases which he was concerned about as the the extension of the writing apparatus of power. So today LLMs offer a new form of writing apparatus, and You could say it in a very literal sense as well. So given their versatility, they can be used, for polluting information environments, uniformizing them, and a number of other mechanisms of power, which I'll discuss. Another aspect of what Savat discusses is that the emerging form of power is neither strictly disciplinary or modulatory, but rather there's a superposition that it can be the form of power can be modulated itself. So he talks about 4 mechanisms which are involved in this form of modulatory power. The recognition of patterns, anticipation of activity, the organization of time, the programming of flows. And crucially, the instruments. So here, what I'm talking about is the way LLMs can be instrumentalized to serve each of these different purposes. So they can be used for computational modeling and simulation of human agents, as we discussed. The sorting process, which is one of the ways, a precondition for the application of the control mechanism, and for determining patterns of behavior by production of tests and samples. Okay, so let me come to the first example, which is so the design of the choice architecture. So Jonnie already touched on that. So I'll come to the way the AI agent itself can be sort of is placed in an intermediary position between users and information resources. So here, Meta's AI assistant has been sort of, positioned within apps like WhatsApp and so on. But what's interesting about this is that what they said when they released this is that it will join a group conversation, and if someone asks something and no one responds, then the AI will respond if no one else does. So ultimately, these won't just be sort of characterless systems. The sort of ambition is to have a whole unlimited diversity of personalities, through which the Meta AI is engaging users. So that's one form. But so what happens? What's happening here is a form of interpellation. So when individuals come to interact with the conversational interface, they are interpellated as computational subjects because they are identifying themselves. They are being identified within a particular sort of subject position in relation to the system, where they're willing to accept the anthropomorphic and the personification of the agent itself, and then questions, suggestions, all of those things which are addressed to the individual in that conversation interface further deepen the level of the interpellation. So probably an extreme example of this, which just came about earlier in May, is ChatGPT-induced delusion, where these individuals were so deeply impacted by the by certain changes to the system that they were you could say spiritually interpolated into like a mystical. Thinking that the system was calling them to be like a messiah or something like that. Like they were the chosen one by the LLM system, by ChatGPT. So, yeah, the point is that this was because of specific specific changes in parameters by the by OpenAI, which increased these levels of sycophancy. So this is an example of the way the power can be modulated and the extreme effects it can have on individuals. Another way of looking at that is the notion of scaled perspecticide, where the entire environment of the individual is the individual is smothered in all directions, and this with this new system, with the new infrastructure that's coming about through generative AI. I mean, this applies the information environment itself, the conversational agent, the persona which the individual is interacting with, but there's a more interesting case, which is when the user themselves defers their thoughts over to the chat system as well. So, for example, smart compose, predictive typing, and so on. When that's run through an LLM, then that's a total takeover of the mind. The effect that has been observed here, just through systems like ChatGPT, has been referred to as latent persuasion. So we're in a predictive typing scenario. What these researchers found is that just accepting those predictions can actually change the opinions of the individual who's accepting those, the text being delivered via the LLM-driven smart completion system. So this is a latent or passive mode of persuasion, which just is sort of intrinsic to the types of outputs that systems like ChatGPT produce. But what's more important than that is that in November 2022, the same month that OpenAI released ChatGPT, they also released this system. Meta released this system called Cicero, and this system is actually not just designed for a passive or latent persuasion. It's designed to persuade on a strategic basis towards a particular objective, and in the game diplomacy. So the idea is that it sort of models the intent of the other players and generates dialogue strategically to achieve the overall domination of the game. I'll show you a clip of the Meta's promotion of that.
At Meta AI, we built Cicero, the first AI to achieve human-level performance in the strategy game Diplomacy.
Diplomacy is one of the most intricate strategy games ever created. It's a game about people rather than pieces. The complexity of the game comes from negotiating with other players and trying to work with them to achieve shared goals.
Each turn in a game of diplomacy takes about 15 minutes, where you negotiate with the other players, write down what you want to do, and then everyone reveals what they're doing all at the same time.
Diplomacy presents an enormous challenge for natural language generation. In order to play the game, the AI agent has to converse simultaneously with 6 other players, sending hundreds of messages over the course of a game. The agent has to use natural language to form relationships and build alliances with other players.
What impresses me most about Cicero is its ability to communicate with empathy and build rapport, whilst also tying that back to its strategic objectives.
So just to note as well, actually, I just noticed so that was Noam Brown speaking at the beginning. He said it's a game of players, not just pieces. And so it's interesting to note that he was, after doing this work with Meta, he ended up going over to OpenAI, where he was instrumental in the work producing, the O1, O3 models, the reasoning models. So the point is that this illustrates a proof of concept of the possibility of incorporating, the next stage of large language models to a stage where they actually incorporate, such strategic goal-directed behavior. Another interesting aspect of this is that so these authors characterize it as deception. Obviously, it's a problematic term to ascribe to LLMs, but what they say is that all of the media rhetoric was that this is is collaborating with other players and so on to achieve its objectives. Actually, what they found when they read the logs is that it was producing totally nonsensical information, like this outright lie by the AI saying it can't make the move because it's on the phone with its girlfriend. So it's just making stuff up to the other players. But the point is that Meta hid these characteristics of the model in the scientific report. So the agent itself mirrors the deceptive nature of the company. But what's interesting is on the website they have this, an animator made this particular graphic suggesting that this Cicero in the middle. So what I'm talking about here is that the extension of AI assistance, which I introduced earlier, is the incorporation of these types, being run by models like Cicero, which are able to impact groups of individuals, to pull them apart. Pull them together, push them apart, and so on. But it sits in that sort of, mediating position amongst different parties, and it's having these, the power is expressed through the model on behalf of political campaigns, commercial campaigns, as I say, to impact people's relations. And again, this is already been explored by this DeepMind publication, using AI to help mediate in deliberations. So the idea here is that the AI comes in, it summarizes both sides of the arguments from the different parties, creates a synthesis, and that's supposed to represent all of the different opinions. I mean, there's so many problems with this, but the one I'd point out is that it lends itself to the more belligerent party. So if what I mean is, the party that doesn't accept the AI's synthesis is going to be considered the belligerent party. That's one aspect. Another aspect is, this is ultimately, because this is Google and Meta producing this is open to the market as well. This type of technology. This is what the role it would have. So I want to talk about. What I want to do actually is situate this as in continuity with the type of work which was significant in the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So at that time, what was causing deep concern was the use of public, data on Facebook to predict psychological attributes. But what's significant is that was really extremely limited amount of data available at the time, like just the likes people were giving to different bits of content. But around about that time, scholars were pointing out that for large-scale persuasion to be more effective, ideally what you want to have is the full history of digital footprints. And you want to be able to continuously calibrate the algorithms to the user over time. And the point here is that LLMs facilitate such efforts. So we already saw that all of this technology is being brought into our lives, but deeply embedded against an existing advertising infrastructure. So here, again, going back to Savat, we have to remember that any action performed in digital networks is simultaneously observation and recording. So that applies just as much to LLMs. But LLMs introduce new effects, such as the fact that it can serve to elicit more information than people would otherwise, usually give up, and it can actually steer conversations in ways to, in an extractive way, to gain more information. So where this is going for the next part of this talk is that this invites the possibility of that continuous calibration and forming models of the user themselves. Again, here's some more research showing, again, by Sandrine Matz, who has done a lot of work in relation to Cambridge Analytica. But here she's saying that LLMs can infer psychological dispositions. So again, they're working with the big 5 ocean personality traits and showing that LLMs can actually identify, just as well as any other, state-of-the-art supervised machine learning algorithms. LLMs can infer psychological dispositions from user-generated text. And for them, I mean, this has the possibility to democratize access to cheap and scalable psychometric assessments. So, it's psychological manipulation for everyone. So yeah, they do point out though that these this can be used and weaponized against people. Again, what I'm trying to do here is situate this very serious ambitions to impose LLMs into the social and life worlds, but bringing that into continuity with what ambitions that were already existent, at the time of Cambridge Analytica. In fact, right to the early days of Facebook. So one of the like data, which led to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, was actually developed. It was developed by this company, Brett Taylor, Friendfeed, who sold it to Facebook, and then he in 2023 goes over to OpenAI. So that should give some indication of what OpenAI's interest in this in LLMs is. Okay, I want to talk about multi-agent simulation. So the idea here is that within this sort of sandbox environment, ChatGPT, so they have extracted about 24 personalities from ChatGPT, and they've had them run around this world and to explore different types of behaviors that emerge. So this is having significant impact in the field of computational social science, because LLMs, the argument is that they provide the basis for much more much more sophisticated models of the agent. So rather than running a survey offline, you can just sample silicon subjects from an LLM, produce demographically correlated silicon subjects, and with each against each demographic, run your survey and collect your data from this way. So this is like orders of magnitude less expensive. So in that world which I just showed you, the generative AI agents, so they had the research, they had a demo which is supposed to play here. Okay, I'll skip it. But it's basically it's just a scroll of the logs which are generated from all of that activity in that sandbox world. But the point is that this ultimately is the type of data which is it's not playing. I'll skip that. But alongside this, is other work which is aiming towards developing a science for the evaluation of LLM personas. So it's not just that you can extract, demographically correlated, samples. The idea here is that to do this in a systematic way and to adopt the practices of psychometric assessment used against people, but to employ that against LLM personas. So the point here is that this paves the way for personas to be verifiably shaped along desired dimensions, according to the authors, wherein shaping involves mechanisms to modulate, increase or decrease levels of specific LLM personality traits. And what I'm going to come to is that this also paves the way for a transition from the questionnaire tradition in psychometric assessment to the lexical tradition. So we also know from other literature that matching content to psychological traits is more effective in terms of persuasion and influence. But here, if you're able to systematically control the personality which is put in front of the individual, that is another level of power which you're able to express through LLM agents. So, as I mentioned, going back to Wiley's scaled perspective side, ultimately it's not just the agent on the other side, but it's the individual themselves that is calibrated with their own data. The LLM, an LLM model of themselves calibrated to respond and behave, to respond and exhibit attitudes and preferences as they do. Can such a thing work? It's already being explored, such as this research from, again, Google DeepMind. What they did here is they took a cohort of people, had them respond to a questionnaire, had LLM model of them also respond to that questionnaire, and then 2 weeks later they came back and asked the same questions and found that the generative agent of themselves responded almost as 85% as accurately as they themselves responded in terms of their attitudes and behaviors that they expressed. Okay. So these are new slides which I've wanted to bring up specifically for this group, which is that the big 5 personality traits, the sort of where they anchor this in the sort of psychological, the literature, is in the lexical hypothesis. So what this argues is that the most important individual differences in human transactions will come to be encoded as single terms in some or all of the world's languages. This paper I was just discussing about controlling and modulating AI personas, they're actually saying that we're applying the lexical hypothesis personality to the evaluation of LLM agents based on the language, the text which they generate. But the point here is that there's been lots of critique about Big 5 and so on and its limitations. But what LLMs and sort of these more sophisticated techniques introduce is a progression from the lexical hypothesis to the deep lexical hypothesis, where you're not just relying on a limited subset of psychological traits which you're trying to evaluate individuals against, but instead you've got almost a high-dimensional space where you can where you can have these differentiations in people's psychological states. So anyway, this was actually researched just in 2022 before ChatGPT came out. So it's already known that language models could be used in this way. But it's not just language that's interesting. So they say that language is limited in capturing the full range of psychological individual differences. Instead, what you want is to have other modalities besides language. And again, transformer models facilitate that. So this is recent research from Meta. And here, what they're doing is they're moving from language to events. So this is the tokenization of events, actions, context. All of that is now the data, not language. Again, they're very specific about the purpose of this, that it's to improve advertising recommendation. So basically, they create an embedding. That embedding captures a high-dimensional attribution of different aspects of the individual, the user. So the idea here is that the state of the art prior to this was lookalike audiences. So you don't do this at the individual level. You have large audiences which you're trying to target for advertising. But once with here, what you're doing is you're shifting to qualitatively and quantitatively different level, to go right down to the individual, and even beyond that to the individual, where it's individuals' different context. In each context, an embedding is produced from that based on different behaviors that people manifest. So instead of tokenized sequences of words, its inputs are sequences of multimodal events from user activity, comments, it includes language as well, but correlated with clicked ads, content, and stuff that the user has viewed. So again, this is research from Meta. Actions speak louder than words. And going back to another thing that Savat mentions from Deleuze is that this construction of the concept of the objectile. Is the timing all right? Okay. Yeah, I'm about to get to a close anyway. So I think that's all right. Anyway, so the last thing I'll say is that all this research together illuminates different ways power can be exercised through LLMs. It can be expressed. I mean, the point is that many people have been paying attention predominantly to us individuals prompting LLMs. But what I want to do is turn things around and say, what does it mean when the LLM is prompting back, which is how the interactions go with these systems. So in the final analysis, the foundation model, generative AI, is revealed as a instrument of power.
Thanks. Thanks for the beautiful and rich presentation. And I leave the question now. If you have any question, so one. Matteo.
Just that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for this presentation. I've got two sort of related questions about how this sort of questioning whether this use of power actually works depending on how people interact with it. So on the one hand, there is this sort of underlying assumption that these systems actually do the things that they're sort of reported to be doing. Sort of they can actually accurately assign some kind of emotional state or some kind of personality based on the data that it has for a particular person. So they actually do this modeling well without lots of errors. And then the second side of it is I'm really interested in how people try to throw off systems that try to do these kinds of things. So I've done a lot of work around content moderation where people invent all kinds of fun linguistic obfuscations to get around the content moderation. So do you think there's sort of two questions. What if the system doesn't work? Does that create all kinds of other interesting downstream effects? And what happens if people try to sort of agentively throw off these systems by manipulating that data in various ways? And what does that do to your broader thesis?
I think that I'll address the first. I'm really very, very grateful to you for bringing up that first point. I don't want anyone to think that I actually think any of this stuff works well or properly. Yeah, that's absolutely critical, and I should have mentioned that. It doesn't, and it is total, is totally circumspect and needs a serious critique. I think my purpose is just to do an excavation of things that are going on and bring that to the forefront, so that people in the room can critique it and deconstruct it and so on. But yeah, it's the worst level of scientific work around. But the point is that there is a market out there for people who do believe that this stuff works, and that is significant. And the thing is, what's more dangerous is that belief that it does work. For example, policymakers, using it to actually determine policy, stuff like that. And this is gradually happening already. So that's where I would see the problem. The other aspect is, I think users themselves as well can sort of internalize some of this, some of the falsity of it as well. The false attribution of psychological, that can be internalized by. There are people who internalize these false projections on themselves. That which is another problem. There are aspects which do work though, which I would emphasize as well, like the ChatGPT induced delusion. So that's really a clear example. And that comes in. You can consider that in relation to other experiments by Facebook, such as the emotional contagion experiment, which they ran. So obviously this is much more powerful now. On the second part, yeah, I haven't thought enough about that, but it's the possibility that people might try to speak in circumlocutions to confuse the system. Yeah, I definitely think there might be a need for something like that to develop, so that people can. I think it's already happening actually. So especially like the sensitive topics, people have developed their entire. I mean, again, if we're talking about these systems' capability to represent language in high-dimensional space, I mean, they'll work it out eventually. So they'll still be able to. Yeah.
I want to add, if I can, very quickly, two things. One is that it was interesting being in the NATO setting, because from a defense perspective, they need to think about the kind of surface area for threat. In a world in which, let's say, America was an aggressor, how could these things be weaponized? And the fact that it could be kind of turned on and turned off, intermittently is a challenge. Anecdotally, I hear strange instances of what I would describe as kind of skills atrophy, where a young person, OpenAI said, and we'll need evidence to bear out whether this is accurate, but the older people are using ChatGPT like Google, younger people are using it like a life coach. And so if instead of, if your friend loses somebody and you write a nice note to them, but you use ChatGPT to write the note, it's still building a trust relationship with that entity and with the authority of the entity. I think additionally, something that Yaqub has drawn out nicely again and again for me is that, like, it's not just the agent. It's not just like the agent is one kind of relevant touch point because of its commercial existence. It's happening. And one thing you can do if you want to experience it yourself is you can Google the CIA prompt and say profile. You can put it into if you use these tools, drop it into ChatGPT and say profile me the way the CIA would, and it will build out your psychological profile and share it with you. I don't think that'll be turned on forever, so you should try it now while it lasts. And the last point about workarounds. I'm very interested in a phenomenon I describe as decomputerization, which is I see as a kind of counter movement to AI. And you see this with like dating apps. Young people are steering away from online dating because the gamification of that realm has proven to kind of plateau. So I think the resistance could be in some places a kind of at the level of the medium, that you do offline things that you could do online.
Thanks, Yaqub. And Jonnie. This is, I think, terrific and terrifying in terms of a future prospect. I think you've... Does it work? Work? I think it works, right? Yes, yes, yes. I think you found a missing link in the evolutionary chain. I think this category of intention is an interesting, useful political category for us. We have the token as a technical unit, but I think this intention is like useful for us for its philosophical and psychological implication. I wonder if micro-intention would be more precise in defining this further atomization and formalization of our human behavior. And I wonder, I think, I think that your research is brilliant, because it's able to find a kind of common ground in between old paradigm like the attention economy and, you know, the new paradigm we are trying to develop, the one related to platform capitalism and gig economy. And I wonder if you see this coupling of this category micro intention with other category we use also in the analysis of the platform economy today, like micro task, right? So you didn't talk about labor, you didn't talk about work, but I think the scenario, the landscape you describe is as a scenario could be very useful also to start mapping with new categories, with, you know, also refreshing our vocabulary, our dictionary, also this other big sphere that is, you know, the new productive sphere based on a further atomization of work in micro tasks. And so I wonder if you also consider to investigate and expand in that direction.
Yeah, I can say, you know, one thing I feel that's left for us to do, and we're talking about expanding this now into a book because it's concerning, and you know, we started talking about this like 18 months ago. You've been thinking about elements of this for a lot longer, and I have in my own world. But you know, I think that one of the pieces I'm keen to get at is the kind of what Tim Wu calls the tyranny of convenience. That, you know, whether or not it is kind of, it is a satisficing element that goes all the way back to the beginning of AI, obviously, that like if it's good enough, you know, we'll use it. So it's kind of the intersection between what we're calling the intention economy and slop, you know, or what elsewhere has been called kind of premium mediocrity, that you have the kind of signifiers of value without the substance. And we get this, or I guess another way to think about it is like in shitification and the intention economy, that it's not, it doesn't need to be pure persuasion to still be a kind of diminishment in life quality through the same old bag of tricks that you see in AI that you guys are profiling as well of, yeah, there's consistent, there's like, it seems like the next logical outcome in a much longer thread. I don't need to convince this room of that, but.
Yeah, thanks, Matteo. My first thought on that would be, and I'd love to develop a deep analysis in this area, would be two things. One is that, you know, I consider LLMs to be parasitic on the cognitive labor of people. So that's the first aspect. And the second aspect is that individuals are conscripted into their own, you know, environment of manipulation. Through this architecture, so they provide the work necessary for their own manipulation. So I don't know if any of you seen Fight Club and the soap. You know how Tyler Durden makes the soap, but you can go look that up yourselves.
So, there's another question.
Yes, you can hear me, right? So thank you so much. I've been like taking pictures because I think I would really want to use some of your materials for teaching, and I was especially fascinated with your kind of diplomacy game. Right from there, I'm actually like very happy that we talk about power in a kind of very kind of raw manner here, and can we like move from power to superpowers, right? I've been like, it's been 5 years I teach Kai-Fu Lee's AI superpowers, and I taught it both in Singapore, right, and in the United States, with very different reactions from the students, you can imagine, right? But of course, like, as you have mentioned, like your conversations with Nessa, right, I'm just thinking how much you want to, Nessa was it? Yeah, sorry, there was like, anyway, right, so I'm like thinking about kind of the agencies and whether like you would consider like, you know, the raw state power in the game, because it seems like if you would read the news, this is what is happening, right, because with DeepSeek and so on and so forth, right, so how would that play in your analysis, like, so not only economic power, but geopolitics?
Again, interesting to be at the table at this NATO session, because I'll put it this way. I don't regret this, but I helped to launch the AI for Good workshops at the major ML conferences, just because when I went to NeurIPS for the first time, I was like, it's so commercial. Where are the kind of other avenues? And initially, it was very useful because we brought historians and people like you into this kind of engineering context, and there was perspective shared. But I grew disillusioned with it and eventually pulled out because I thought, if we're not talking about security, a lot of this just gets pretty boring, or just you can imagine. I think the challenge, I guess, that I would put back to you is like what the Europeans are going to need to decide what their answers are. NATO would probably love to use everything we're talking about and to have their own priority position applying these tools. And the reason I go to decomputerization is I see it as a possible form of détente, and that's wishful thinking. But I presume that there will be multiple instances of mutually assured diminishment from applying these tools widely, or we're just entering, democracy's been in decline for a long time, and we're just entering a new era. But that gets a bit beyond my stead. I'm not necessarily the right expert to talk about that. What do you think?
So thanks you all, and thanks Jonnie and Yaqub, and